clothing I wear put together by sweatshop workers, glasses, like everything. And if you wanted to step beyond the slavery element, like all of the stuff that I buy, it goes towards corporations. I believe that wage slavery is unethical, the exploitation of workers, and everything you buy contributes to that, unless you're buying from a co-op.
Okay, well,
I remarked recently on Twitter that you can't work from the chalkboard to the battlefield. You have to get out on the battlefield, have that real world experience to understand what the symbols mean when they're on the chalkboard. That is especially true of the social science of economics. That is especially true of understanding what's wrong with communism. It's especially true of understanding what's right with capitalism, what works about capitalism, which doesn't look very convincing when put out as a theoretical statement on a chalkboard. And on the other hand, there were a lot of sort of pleasing illusions built into a text like this, the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx. I'm going to have a series of videos coming up criticizing Marx. Come on, stay in focus here, camera. There's a lot of coded language about class struggle and class war. If you've seen what that means in practice, if you've seen what that means in the battlefield, even coded language about having, the centralization of ownership of the means of production, what that really means in practice. It might look good on the chalkboard, but you're seeing a symbolic diagram on the chalkboard and you're not really understanding what those symbols represent. So an argument from someone like Vaush, whom I regard as a crypto-communist, more on that in just a second, it's probably more influential in the world today in 2019 than the type of argument we find in Karl Marx's original writing in the classics of communist theory or philosophy. And what he's doing, I think, powerfully shapes people's lives in many ways. One part of his argument is something I've addressed many, many times on this YouTube channel, but now probably a couple of years ago. It's what I call the boycott mentality. And this is part and parcel of the purity mentality in politics, the idea that the political movement is built by and for the purification of the individual and the purification of the group or the quote-unquote vanguard that's engaged in this movement, in this transformative form of radical politics. The boycott mentality presumes that the way to pursue political change is by not buying things, by refusing to buy things. And then inevitably also, there's the critique of the boycott mentality that leads to his feeling of futility that, as he basically puts it, if you can't boycott everything that's immoral, why boycott anything that's immoral? So if you can't refuse to purchase all of these terrible things produced by slavery and exploitation and what have you, then what's the point of just boycotting one thing or another? So the most fundamental mistake made here with the boycott mentality is the assumption that we change history, that we change the political course of nation states or cultures by subtraction, by not participating in the economy, by not participating in exploitation, by not participating in politics even, by withdrawing ourselves from the free market where things were bought and sold, as opposed to seeing yourself as transforming the culture you're a part of, transforming the economy you're a part of, transforming the political system, the nation you're a part of, by plunging deeper into that economy, by being willing to commit to doing more harm in the pursuit of the political goal that you're trying to achieve here. So, very simple example, PCRM, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. Okay, they're not stereotypical radicals. In most of their photographs, they're wearing full lab coats. Most of the leading members are medical doctors or research scientists. Sometimes they wear a suit and tie, but whatever. PCRM, who knows how many disposable plastic containers they're using? Who knows how much harm they're doing to the environment by taking flights, traveling by airplane back and forth between Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. and New York. And, they're taking on board, they're committed to the pursuit of their goals, and they're willing to do all kinds of harm in the pursuit of those goals. And they're willing to lobby government and, for example, ask for donations and then take those donations and give them to lawyers. So again, ethically, you might ask at the midpoint of that process, okay, so you just collected $300,000. And now you're going to take those $300,000 and give it to some of the wealthiest people in the world. You're going to give it to a law firm in Washington, D.C., to press your case against Congress, arguing about whether or not the amount of cholesterol in eggs is so unhealthy that it should be illegal to, promote eggs as a health food and this kind of thing. Okay, so wouldn't it be more ethical to take the $300,000 and give it to the poorest of the poor, help homeless people or help starving people in Africa? There are ethical questions you can ask at every stage of that, including, as I say, the air pollution produced by the airplanes. And the answer is no. You don't change the world by refusing to buy airplane tickets. You don't change the world by refusing to buy meat or by refusing to buy alcohol or refusing to buy crack cocaine. You change the world by making a positive commitment to go out and actually make that change happen, actually force that change. Hey, you know what I'd like? I'd like to live in a country where there are no cocaine addicts, where there are no drug addicts, no heroin addicts, let's say. Want to eliminate cocaine, heroin. Do you think I'm going to accomplish that through a boycott? Do you think I'm going to accomplish that by just refusing to purchase cocaine and heroin myself? Do you think I'm going to do that just by having a boycott movement where I invite others and motivate others and have rallies and maybe picnics and political festivals where we celebrate our boycott? We all pat ourselves on the back and act like we're so morally superior because we refuse to buy cocaine and we refuse to buy, heroin. No, that's never going to change the world. That's never going to transform the world. In fact, if you're serious about reducing the levels of cocaine and heroin being bought and sold, being consumed in our society, you're going to have to embrace doing quite a lot of harm. You're probably going to have to imitate some of the most successful countries in the world at reducing and eliminating drug use. Countries like Japan, countries like Singapore, countries like communist China, where, a certain level of draconian repression, where, the police really do get tough on drugs, get tough on crime. I used to live in a part of China that was right on the border with a civil war zone where opium and quite a number of other drugs like methamphetamines and MDMA, ecstasy, were being produced, refined, and traded openly. There were rebel armies, walking distance from where I lived, there were rebel armies who were, trading opium for guns. Okay? And where I was on the Chinese side of the border. Not a single drug addict visible in the whole city. Not a single homeless person on drugs. There were posters up letting you know that if you use drugs, you were going to jail. There was a very, very effective, repressive government there. And also a culture that in a positive way encouraged mental vigilance, acuity, sobriety. But you were right next to a war zone full of illicit drugs, and yet in that part of Yunnan, this is bordering on Kachin State. This is the Kachin, Jingpo, Shan State armies, a bunch of different rebel armies active in that neighborhood. So, if you want to pursue that goal, the way to get there is not going to be a boycott. Now, guys, I'm self-critical. I'm vegan. But I do not believe that the function of veganism, the positive impact of veganism, is achieved through a boycott. I think the boycott is just stage one, which is basically like a social media exercise where we commit to this boycott, we engage in this boycott, and then we get to meet one another, we get to recruit talent to do exactly the kind of thing PCRM is doing already, to get organized and make a positive difference to the world. So guess what? Guess what, Vaush? If you sincerely want to help the factory workers, if you sincerely want to get out there and improve labor conditions in China, in Vietnam, in Indonesia, if you want to improve labor conditions even in the great state of Texas in the USA, the way to do that is not through a boycott. You're never going to achieve those goals just by you personally committing that you're not going to buy the shirt because you think it's the product of exploitation. Okay? So look, step two of his argument is then getting into his appeal to futility fallacy is he presents the whole world as so evil. He thinks of all consumption as being so overwhelmingly evil that there's no point in him boycotting just one thing or another. He has to resign himself to the idea that his t-shirt is produced by terrible exploitation. Unless, he says, unless it's produced by a co-op. Okay, so this gets into the profound ethical significance of ignorance and knowledge. And what's in between ignorance and knowledge is active research. Okay? We're all born ignorant. And if you've managed to make it to age 25, congratulations. Congratulations on not committing suicide. Make it to age 25. If you've managed to make it to age 25, you will have had at least a few examples in your life where you look back at decisions you made and think, If only I had known more, I would never have done that thing. I would never have made that compromise. You look back at decisions in your life with tremendous regret, because what we know changes how we feel. What we know changes what we regard as ethical or unethical. Knowing what I know about cheese produced from cow milk, I can't enjoy cheese. I can't just set that aside, right? There was a time when I was a child, I didn't know these things. I didn't think my parents weren't vegan or what have you. And, so obviously my perception and my experience of what it is to eat cheese was profoundly different, okay? So, ignorance matters, knowing matters, and being motivated to engage in active research to change your perception of the world and change what it is you're willing and unwilling to do really matters. But, that change doesn't all go in one direction. It's not the case that researching the reality of factory conditions is just going to lead to your radicalization. I really don't believe that. So, for example, he suggests that everything is exploitation unless it's a co-op. And the selection of examples is telling. He talks about where your t-shirt is made, but I guess that's a little bit mysterious to him because he's never visited a t-shirt factory and he's never done any research into the reality of t-shirt production. So let's start with an example that's really not too mysterious at all, not even for communists. Let's talk about the grocery store. Okay? So from Vaush's point of view, what he's claiming is that working in a grocery store for $12 an hour is slavery, is exploitation, is quote-unquote wage labor. He regards that as completely immoral unless the grocery store you're working at is a co-op. So in this case, in this example, you may know people, dear viewer. You probably know a few people who've worked at a grocery store, and you've been to a grocery store and you've seen what their jobs are like. It's not so mysterious. I've known people who worked in grocery stores. I never had that job myself. Oh, no, wait, I did. Shit, I forgot. Yeah, actually, I have worked in a grocery store a long time ago. Okay, anyway, yeah. So when I was working in a grocery store, did I feel my fellow workers were horribly exploited? And then if I compared what I was doing to the employees at a co-op, because I've known a few grocery store co-ops, whether you live in the United States, Canada, or Europe, you've been to a few grocery store co-ops, and what do you know? Life is not that different. In fact, you may know a private for-profit grocery store that pays its employees better than the co-op. You may know individual employees at the co-op who say they hate their job and they feel they're being exploited and they want to go work at a grocery store that's a heartless corporation instead because they think they'll have a better deal. They'll work better hours, they'll have better conditions, whatever it is. Okay, the reality of the difference it makes working for a corporation versus working for a co-op is unbelievably slippery and trivial. I mean, I've said this before in a video, but the prices on the products may be slightly higher, the wages of the employees may be slightly higher, the level of professionalism and innovation and the management may be lower, but these are not worlds apart. It's not as if when you go to a co-op, you feel like you're walking into a socialist utopia, and when you walk into a corporate grocery store, you're feeling you're walking into a capitalist dystopia. They're so close, it's laughable. Now, I'd like to suggest to you, dear viewer, that if you walk into a factory that makes t-shirts and you walk into a co-op that makes t-shirts, it's not all that different. Another example that I've had a lot of contact with is baking. If you take a minute to think about the lot of the common baker, the life of a baker, it's not the case at all that being a self-employed baker is necessarily better than being employed in a large factory. There are many, many advantages to being employed as a baker in a factory. Regular hours, regular pay, no risk to yourself. If you are a small, self-employed, bespoke baker, the main advantage you have is tax evasion. Most of the people who do small-scale baking like that, they can be creative with what they report to the government about how much money they made. They get paid cash in hand and so on. But I mean, just in terms of the grueling schedule you have to work, if you want to bake your own bread or bake your own croissant and then go and sell them at a farmer's market or a county fair or something, when you are your own boss and you are your own employee and you have to buy your own ingredients at your own risk and you have to calculate your own profit and losses, it is not easy to say at all that the self-employed baker is less exploited than the baker who's employed in a large-scale factory. What is easy to say is that the large-scale factory is much more efficient. And because of that greater efficiency, often the factory can provide a much higher quality of life for all of its employees, right? Which is measured in pay, benefits, and other considerations, including like how many hours of sleep you get a night. Because baking, very long hours, often starting at 2 a.m., maybe 4 a.m., depending on the bakery. That's true for small bakeries and large. So again, a lot of left-wing people, they go into a situation like that with the attitude, small is beautiful, wage labor is exploitation, whereas being self-employed or being part of a co-op magically solves those problems because you no longer have, quote-unquote, the exploitation of man by man. That's an old communist canard. And again, if you actually learn these things, if you don't work from the chalkboard to the battlefield, if you go in and learn what these things really, how they really work in the economy on the battlefield, and then work your way back to the chalkboard, you're going to have a much richer understanding of these things. So look, guys, ignorance matters, and what we learn and what we know changes how we feel. And if you take the time to really learn about where your t-shirts come from, what it's like to work in a factory, the advantages and disadvantages of being employed in manufacturing of any kind, whether it's in a textile factory or in a computer assembly factory, you will start to understand why people volunteer for these jobs, why farmers are eager to give up working on their parents' farm and start a new life in the city, manufacturing t-shirts, manufacturing computers, so on and so forth. So I don't want to give too many long anecdotes here, but I used to live in Southeast Asia, in Laos and Cambodia and northeastern Thailand. I visited many factories. I did research on factories and factory conditions, including human rights research. This ghoulish picture that's being painted by left-wing extremists that any employment of any kind is just too horrible to behold. Well, when I lived in the capital city of Laos, Vientiane, there were teenage girls who would drop out of high school to go and work in a t-shirt factory. They made other kinds of clothes too, whatever, t-shirts, blue jeans, you name it. And they would buy themselves the fanciest motorcycles that existed there. They would be earning so much money as teenagers who had dropped out of high school that they were teenage girls in the capital city of the country, and they earned more money than their own parents. Their own parents would be back living on the rice farm, and they'd say, wow, this is an amazing opportunity. So the purchasing power of the wage they had and the freedom and options and opportunity that gave them at an early age. And then when you stretch it out over a full life cycle, like, okay, wow, so they got this great start in life working in a factory as a teenager. What did they go on to do afterwards? When I did social science research on this in Cambodia, the number one answer for the women working at our clothing factory, so again, not just t-shirts, but including t-shirts, the number one answer for what do you plan to do when you leave this job was that they were opening their own shops. They were opening their own, and I saw some of those too. They were opening their own small factories. They were opening their own tailoring shops or what have you. They were taking the skills they learned in a factory and going on to business for themselves. And the vast majority of the employees in those factories, they would only work for about 2 years. So, some of them want to switch and go into a totally different field. So they'd work for 1 year or 2 years, save up a pile of money, and then go open a shop, go into another business, go back to school, go and do whatever it is they wanted to do with the rest of their lives. But it was not the case at all in Cambodia and Laos that working in a factory was a dead-end job, that it was a hopeless job, that it was a low-paying job in that society. And the reality of the work they're doing, what is it you imagine that's so horrible about actually stitching two pieces of fabric together? I've mentioned this before on the channel. There is a documentary you can see. You can see it here on YouTube, or you can pay to see it somehow elsewhere on the internet. But there is a documentary showing clothing factory conditions in China that is called China Blue. I would just warn you, there are two different versions of the film. One has been edited down to just 1 hour to broadcast on TV. I really recommend you watch the longer version of the film. It's better. But you get to see the human reality. And yeah, that documentary is meant to be shocking. It's meant to wake you up to the fact that a lot of factory workers in China live in terrible conditions. But guess what? If you want to make the world a better place, if you want to improve factory conditions in China, you have to get motivated, you have to get organized, you have to actually get out and positively make the world a better place. You can never make those changes by just subtracting yourself from the equation, by your decision to not buy a new t-shirt at all. It's never going to achieve those political objectives. And you know what? If you start flying back and forth between Washington, D.C. and Yunnan, China, so you can visit factories in China and maybe film the conditions there and then go back to America and lobby the government and say, hey, we need tariffs, we need to enforce, higher standards for working conditions in China, we need to punish American companies that are profiting by exploiting the working conditions. You know what? You can never compensate for the damage you have done to the Earth's upper atmosphere. You can never take back the pollution you've caused. When you commit positively to achieve something in this world, when you commit to political action, whether it be in peace or in war, whether it be in democracy or whether it be fighting against a dictatorship, okay, you are committing to do harm. You're committing to do damage along the way to achieving that positive goal. That's why ethics matter. That's why politics matters. That's why we all have this terrible, dreadful sense that at bottom, we're dangerous people, and the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Some of the most terrible disasters in the whole of human history, including the creation of communism in China and Russia, some of those things were taken up as experiments by people who sincerely believed they were making the world a better place. And what they ended up doing instead was killing millions of people.
I mean, really, people like to disrespect my crew, but the fact is that you know my name and I don't know you.